Good evening, everyone. Thank you for watching tonight's video. Gordon Causey coming to you live and unscripted. And today is the 13th of March, Wednesday, the 13th of March, 2024. Candy the Wonder Pup is here. Ooh, she just wants her treat. You just want a treat. You just want a treat. You just want a treat. You don't want to fight because I've got this in my hand. Give me your paw. Lay down. Speak. Speak. Do it again. Speak. Give me a good one. Speak. 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 Come on. Speak. Good. That's a better one. Come here. Come on up. There you go. Candy is taken care of. As always, the live chat is on. I see I have at least one person watching, so you're welcome to say hi. This Jason King. Good evening and happy Wednesday. Happy Wednesday to you as well. When I was doing my video yesterday, it was on the rapture and the reasons why I don't ascribe to that particular doctrine. And I referenced a passage from Daniel in it, which talks about the writing on the wall. People have heard that expression before, and many may not know where it originates. It comes from the Bible. It comes from the book of Daniel, where, and I forget the name of the king. There was Nebuchadnezzar, then there was another one, then there was Darius, and the second king, his name is Belshazzar or something very similar to Daniel's Babylonian name. So I have trouble with it. But all of a sudden writing appears on the wall and no one can read it or interpret it. And Daniel is brought and it talks about calamitous times coming to the Babylonians. And that's where this expression, the writing on the wall comes from. And so in talking about climate change, I'm kind of looking at the writing on the wall, which is challenging because I make no claims to having prophetic knowledge. But looking at the way things are going, where we are now, where we've been, I think we can get a reasonably good gauge on what is coming. And I think, as it says in the description to this video, that we can expect to see a ramp up in the level of propaganda concerning global warming or climate change. Stick whatever label on it you want. I need to trim my eyebrows. I'm getting old, and when you're old, your eyebrows start going insanely crazy. Anyway, already within the last few weeks, there have been wildfires reported in Texas. And I don't know the degree to which people are paying attention to this, but tens of thousands of cattle have either been killed in the wildfires or have had to be euthanized because of damage to their hooves and things of that nature. And they're saying that the devastation is going to be generational because so much cattle has been lost. Without reading too deep into it, I'm expecting to see beef prices go up. And big news item in Canada is the fact that on April 1st, April Fool's Day, that the carbon tax in Canada is going up by in and around 15%. They're adding another, I don't know how many dollars to the carbon tax. And that means that everything is going to go up in price. And they're going to need to sell this. And in order to sell it, they're going to have to, I think we're going to see a repeat of last year, only I think it's going to be worse. If you remember last year, you had the wildfires in Ontario, Quebec, and Alberta. It inundated the northeastern U.S., Detroit, Ohio, New York, Boston, and they were blaming the Canadian wildfires. And why are we having these wildfires? Well, it has to be climate change. And I want to speak to those points because forestry management is an area that governments have been cutting back on for the last 10, 15 years. the North America, and I would invite anyone to look this up, anyone who is inclined toward believing the climate change narrative, I would invite you to verify this, but there are significantly more trees in the Northern Hemisphere in places like Canada and the US than there were 100 or more years ago. And the reason is because of forestry management and because we no longer burn wood for heat. Now, because of forestry management and because, logging companies used to go in and it was called clear cutting. They would take out an entire acres upon acres, probably hundreds, maybe thousands of acres. They would clear cut an area. Now they are far more selective, and replanting programs are part of it. So that, and trees they suck carbon out of the atmosphere. Carbon can be described as plant food. It's part of photosynthesis. They suck the carbon out of the atmosphere and they put oxygen into the atmosphere. And so because we have a lot more forest now than we did 100 years ago, even with all the fires, forestry management became important. And one of the things that forestry management would be engaged in is something called controlled burns. As forests age and trees die, they collapse, they fall to the ground, they become dry tinder, and then a lightning strike or a passerby tossing a cigarette or a campfire, the potential for forest fires goes up. And so to mitigate this, what used to take place were what were called controlled burns, where I don't know it intimately. I haven't studied this in an in-depth level, but I understand it from 100 miles up. They would build fires, they would dig out fire stops, and then they would go in and control burn an area and burn off that dead wood, this dry tinder, and do it in a controlled fashion so that fires wouldn't jump, and they would be ready. They'd have personnel on the ground so that if a fire was at risk of jumping across a fire break, that they could stamp it out. Likewise, Alberta and Nova Scotia, two provinces that had forest fire or wildfire problems this past year. In Nova Scotia, they had big towers set up. There used to be an old TV show, Canadian TV show called Forest Rangers. I think that was the name of it. And really cheesy kids show from the 1970s, maybe even 60s. But you got those big, huge lookout towers. And that would allow forest rangers or forestry management personnel to, with binoculars and to scan and to look out and see if there were any forest fires happening. And then what could happen, then they could go and respond quickly. All those watchtowers were mothballed, either taken down or just abandoned. And so that surveillance doesn't take place the way it used to, and satellite imagery isn't able to penetrate and see small wisps of smoke coming up from a small smoldering fire. And then likewise, they had both in Nova Scotia and Alberta, they had what are sometimes called heli-tac crews of a small number of typically men, although I imagine it could be women too, who would rappel down into remote locations that aren't easily accessible by roads, for example, or rail, and you couldn't land a plane in the area. So these heli-tac crews would come down, maybe half a dozen firefighters, and they could attack a blaze before it blew up into something bigger. And again, in Alberta, in Nova Scotia, those crews, those programs were mothballed. So we're not managing forests. We've got much more wood, much more dry timber. We've got much more dry, rotting timber on forest floors now, but we're not managing it like we did in years past. For the past 10, 15 years, they've been cutting back. And now we have a perfect storm situation where these fires can break out and they can have far-reaching effects, as we saw with the fires in Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, with the smoke inundating the northeastern seaboard, hundreds of millions of people. Air quality is impacted. And I'm expecting to see this ramp up exponentially over this coming year, because it's going to be needed in order to sell people on the necessity of combating climate change. It's going to be a cause and effect situation. And I think we can look back on the COVID era and we can see what they did in the COVID era, and we can kind of project it onto what's going to happen with climate change. I mean, what we saw in the COVID era is every fall, winter season, so-called flu season, every flu season, I've read the articles going back to 2016, 17, 18, 19, before COVID came along, and you would read stories regularly during flu season in the mainstream media, in CBC, Global CTV, talking about how hospitals are overwhelmed, how every bed is occupied. Read a story about they were treating patients in the waiting room sitting in chairs because there wasn't another space available, conference rooms being converted into treatment facilities, and how people were dying because of triage, where they give priority based on how sick a person is, and horrible situation. And but this was before COVID. It was normal, and no one batted an eyelash. No one expected the world to be shut down because of it, because everyone knew it was the flu. And we've all, pretty much everyone, I think, doesn't matter whether you get that annual flu shot or not. I've never had one myself, but I think everyone's likely had the flu. I can recall in my lifetime, I can recall two instances where I got horribly sick with the flu, and you feel like you're going to die. You know, you had the flu. Oh, yeah, I thought I was praying to die. It was horrible. You heard that before. And then COVID came along and they weaponized something that normally would take place, and they weaponized it. And I would go even further as to say that they greased the skids somewhat. I've mentioned many times Dr. John Campbell on his channel here on YouTube. He's publicized the National Health Service's protocols for dealing with elderly COVID patients, and they were prescribed opiates and morphine. And when you put those two drugs in combination, what does it do? It suppresses respiration. So you have someone who's struggling to breathe. Okay, here's a cocktail of drugs that will further someone struggling to breathe. Let's give them medication that will make it even more difficult for them to breathe. And you have to wonder, I have to question, I have to speculate that did people die who didn't have to die? Could people have recovered from COVID on their own? Maybe they just needed some oxygen, one of those little oxygen things in their nose to give them some added oxygen, but instead they were given opiates and morphine, and their respiration was suppressed. And so what I see happening is we have a situation certainly in Canada, where we've largely stopped the control burn program. So there's lots of dry tinder there. And all you have to do now is just respond in a fashion that is weak enough that it allows these fires to blow out of control. And then you can blame climate change, and then you can impose draconian measures in order to combat this problem that you created. Think about COVID. COVID, we all know it came, well, we don't know. We cannot say with 100% empirical certainty that SARS-CoV-2 came from a lab in Wuhan, China. But I think it's more than reasonable to put that out as the overwhelmingly most likely reason why COVID came out is because they created this little SARS-CoV-2 bug in a lab, probably in coordination with other labs. Canada's National biotech lab in Winnipeg was probably involved in it, I bet, and created this weak-ass little respiratory virus and then weaponized it and used that as an excuse to bring in eventually the ultimate goal of that whole process, I'm convinced, is that they wanted to force as many needles into as many arms as possible. And at first it was willing. The first people in Canada, initially they were only giving it to healthcare workers and the elderly and those at extreme risk. But by April, May, it was pretty much rolled out universally. Anyone who wanted one could get one. And they probably succeeded in getting somewhere in and around 50% of the population that were willing to get the shot. But I would submit that 40 to 50% of the population was like, no, I'm not getting that thing. You rushed it through and you did it in months. And it's, a pharmaceutical product properly developed takes 10 years plus. You can't, science does not move at warp speed. Science is a slow, meticulous process. So I'm not getting it. And then that's when they brought in, having already captured somewhere in around 40 to 50% of the population who bought into the propaganda fully. Then they were able to bring in the vaccine passport. And this 40, 50% who already had taken the shot was, you've got to get it too, because if you don't get it, mine won't work. Sanity of that situation. And I can see the same type of mechanism playing out with climate change. Actually, if you look back, I mean, you don't have to, but if you want to, I did a video back on April 30th of 2023. In that video, I made 3 predictions for the remainder of the year. I said, these are the 3 things I expect to happen before 2023 comes to an end. And the first one was that I expected at that point, I said, we're going to see the declaration of a global climate emergency. And it never came to fruition. That didn't happen. I got that one wrong. But we did see the Maui fires, the fires that, destroyed air quality in a large chunk of the United States. I've got Mike Christie saying they create catastrophes to gain more power. Precisely. It's called crisis management. They want to affect systemic change to global, and most importantly, the Western world. They want systemic change in the global in our global economy and culture. And the only thing is, absent a crisis, it's often difficult to affect that kind of radical change. So if a crisis doesn't present itself, you create one. And we had the creation of a crisis with COVID. They made this weak-ass little virus, and then they had a few months later, here you go, just 2 shots. Just take 2 shots of this miracle vaccine, and you will have long-lasting, robust, sterilizing immunity to infection. What a lie that was. Long-lasting, durable, sterilizing immunity to infection. You can't get it. You can't pass it on to someone else. What a crock. And now they're going to tell us that we have to raise the cost on everything. We have to drastically reduce our carbon footprints. Otherwise, these wildfires and these situations, which some have suggested, in particular with the fires that occurred in Maui, that the term is DEW, directed energy weapon. And I don't discount anything at this point. Technology has gotten to such a level now that I don't think anything is beyond the realm of possibility. And there were horrible stories there about people who were trying to evacuate out of that town of Lanai, I think it was called. And there was basically one road out of the town, and roadblocks were put up. And the people who bypassed the roadblocks and went off road survived. But those who did what the authorities wanted them to do, turned around and went back, were all killed. And I call it a prediction if you like, but I think this year we could very well see the declaration of a global climate emergency. Against the backdrop of this, we now have the new and updated international health regulations that the World Health Organization has brought out. They are being voted on in May. So we're in March now, April, May, just a couple months from now. All World Health Organization signatory countries, every country that supports or belongs to the World Health Organization, Canada, United States, Western Europe, pretty much all the developed world, they're now will be signing on to these updated international health regulations. And they've been changed in a dangerous way because whereas the old international health regulations, the regulations in place during the COVID era, the World Health Organization was an advisory body, and countries were not obligated to follow World Health Organization directives. The new language gives the WHO, the World Health Organization, gives them the power to mandate these. How exactly it would be enforced, I don't know, but it also gives the Director General of the World Health Organization, who currently is this Dr. Tedros individual, gives him arbitrary power to make a declaration of a global health emergency. And what I could see happening is I could see climate change being deemed a health emergency because it's causing heart attacks and all manner of things, which I genuinely believe the reason we're seeing explosions and strokes and heart attacks and aneurysms and autoimmune disorders and all manner of other health-related issues, and why excess deaths in countries like Canada, the United States, and countries that had high rates of vaccination, the excess death rates in Western Europe, Canada, Australia, United States, it should be low. We just had a pandemic. All the sick and vulnerable and weak individuals should have been, there's something in epidemiology called dry tinder theory. And it ties into climate change. This idea that within a population, there are always those who are weak and vulnerable to a viral pathogen like a flu, a COVID, an RSV. And so COVID moved through the population, and over the 1 to 2 years that it raged, well, it wiped out the weak and vulnerable. Now all that should be left are the strong, and our excess death rate should be down, you would think. But instead, it keeps going. It's persistently high. Canada, we're at 10 to 15% excess deaths, meaning more deaths than would be expected using the 5-year preceding average. And I'm kind of going off on two tangents here, talking about COVID, talking about climate change, but this is all part and parcel of the agenda put forth by the World Economic Forum, dubbed their Great Reset Agenda. Most will probably be aware that a number of years back, they had something of an advertising campaign saying, "You will own nothing and be happy." You will own nothing. I will own nothing. The so-called elites with the World Economic Forum, they will own everything. There's another book put out by Klaus Schwab called The Fourth Industrial Revolution, which I think would be better titled The Fourth Reich. And that book proposes this idea of stakeholder capitalism. And the way I view it is this: stakeholder capitalism, they're the capitalists, we're the stakes. And the ultimate goal is to have whatever is left of humanity when everything is said and done. Another term put on this is UN Agenda 2030, and it's only 2024. We still have 6 years to go before 2030. But the ultimate goal of this is to have the vast majority of humanity as the digital property of our corporate masters, with government just there to hold the leash. I'm reading Vibin Hutt is back, and he said Death Valley National Park recorded high temperature was 134 degrees Fahrenheit, 1913. Today runs about 120-ish. Let me know when it hits 135.5, when there's a new record. Al Gore is selling something. Oh, yes, Al Gore. And these are just the public faces of this agenda. The Al Gores, Justin Trudeau, Joe Biden. These are the puppets. And there are individuals within the World Economic Forum who are basically pulling their strings. The entire reason we have Justin Trudeau as prime minister in this country, Canada, is because he's a product of something they call their Young Leaders Program. And the World Economic Forum is something of a convergence. It's government, it's corporate, and it's academic. The key leg or the key component is the corporate, because they have the cash. You look at BlackRock, you look at these guys like Bill Gates and what's his name, Bezos, and these individuals who have literally $100+ billion. They have more money than they could ever spend in a million lifetimes. And so what they want now is more power, more control. I'm going to catch up with what's being said. Kevin C. Is quoting scripture. Hallelujah. Amen. He's quoting 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 58. I'm not familiar with what NASB means. That's the translation. Therefore, my beloved brothers and sisters, be firm, immovable, always excelling in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Amen. I mean, I am absolutely 100%. I make no apologies for it. I am a professing Christian. I bothers me the amount of division that happens among Christians. That was my video of yesterday. I mean, we've all got our doctrines, our professions, our interpretations, and ultimately get into relationship with Jesus Christ, because bad times are coming. And no, I do not believe in a rapture. Again, that's my video of yesterday. I know it's a popular belief today, but I would invite you to read into it and to look at the opposing, for those who do believe in the rapture. I would invite you to look at it critically and to allow yourself to try and see things from the other side, because I've looked at it from both sides. And I know it's a contentious issue. I'm going to keep reading. Vibin Hutt says anything for a buck. It's about more than money. Money's always a component of any of this. You know, the money is always at the root of so many of the things that happen in the world. But now I think it's more, I honestly do believe it's more about power and control. The largest single owner of farmland in the United States is Bill Gates. And I looked at it a while ago. I think he owns something like, I forget, but I think he owns a few million acres. He's the single largest owner of farmland in the United States, but it is still only a tiny fraction of the total amount of farmland that exists within that country. I imagine he wants to buy more, but he just can't get his hands on it now, because even with 200 billion or whatever it is that he has, in order to buy, you need a willing seller. And you can create the conditions that will make sellers more willing to let go of their possessions. So catching up. Vibin Hutt says the fear porn they sell is putrid. It is putrid, but it does work on a large part of the population. And breaking through the climate change narrative, I think it's going to be as difficult as it was during the COVID era, because people would tune on to the nightly news. They would see horrific images of a morgue in somewhere in Italy with bodies piled up, and they and you have to take this seriously. Look, watch the news. They've got a mobile mortuary set up in Central Park in New York. We're all going to die. And there's a reason they do this. I mean, in my home country of Canada, kind of ground zero at the beginning in 2020 was a town called Bobcaygeon, Ontario, which is north of me, an hour and a half or 2 hours north of here. Big Tragically Hip wrote a song about it famously. And they had a nursing home called the, Shady Pines Nursing Home, whatever it was called. It had the word pine in it. And the nightly news, which I don't listen to much. I don't have television, cable, or satellite. But at the time, 2020, I was working at a radar station in the Army. We had a big screen TV up, and during the daytime, during what I'll call business hours, Monday to Friday, say 8 to 4, the only programming we were allowed to have up on that TV would be news or current events. And I would hear the reporting, and it was always doom and gloom. Dun, 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 dun. More terrifying news from Bobcaygeon, Ontario, as the tsunami of death continues at the Shady Pines Nursing Home, claiming another 5 victims. Dun, 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 story to follow. And you're, oh my God. And it worked. It worked on a large percentage of the population. If you can, propaganda works best when it's aimed at the emotional, because individuals who are reacting in an emotional state don't think. The capacity for critical thought goes out the window. Mike Christie says Poilievre will get his government out of the WEF and hopefully the WHO as well. Now, Poilievre, during one of his recent speeches, has said, and he said this on numerous occasions, that Canada will end all its involvement with the World Economic Forum. We'll see if and when Poilievre is elected to government. The only thing is, we are in all likelihood not going to have an election in Canada until October of 2025. We've got basically about a year and a half to go where we're more or less stuck with Trudeau. And I do have a hope that if Trudeau's polling numbers go down low enough, that his own caucus might revolt and try and push him out, and they could make his leadership unworkable if they were to if enough of his caucus would try and push him out. I think it could happen. It could be affected, but will it happen? I think the invisible hand behind the scenes, this invisible hand that's controlling the puppet strings, those strings attach itself to a large number of people in the Liberal caucus as well. And so I don't want to put false hope, faint hope in Trudeau being gone before October of 2025. And that is, they say 2 weeks in politics is a long time. Well, a year and a half is an eternity. And what could happen between now and then if climate change propaganda is capable of scaring people to the degree that if it works as well as it did during the COVID era, God help us. I'm just going to keep reading. Viebenhat says, I have an idea. Tyranny, of course. And then Kevin C. is giving me what NASB stands for, New American Standard Bible. And he says, yes, division in Christianity is rampant and sad. I wholeheartedly believe in a rapture, but I won't fight about it. And that's great. If you don't, that's fine. God bless. Thank you. It's something I don't mind discussing, but the difficulty is I don't want to fight over it. And the video I did yesterday, if you want to watch it, I expect to be here. I expect to have to endure until the end. I do hope I do believe, obviously, that God has the power to rapture me, to rapture anyone, like Elijah, like Enoch. He has the power and capacity, absolutely. Is it prophesized? But we'll leave that aside. I'm going to keep reading. Everyone is wise to Bill. Not everyone. And this is one of the things. I think there's a tendency for us to get stuck into our echo chambers and to basically avoid conversation with those who hold opposing views, and we only hear coming back at us that which we already believe. I work with this guy, David, super nice gentleman. Well, we can't talk about climate because science says. He's one of these science says individuals. And it's not science, it's scientists. There are scientists with the International Panel for Climate Change that receive hundreds of millions of dollars in funding every year, probably a billion plus globally, to conduct research, but they won't get a thin red dime if their research doesn't point to this narrative of carbon being the big bad boogeyman and the need to destroy Western economies in the name of saving the planet. I mean, some of the arguments that I make with the climate change cult members is, let's say that it's right. Let's just assume that these computer modeled simulations that say carbon is the big bad boogeyman and that this greenhouse effect is real and that we have to significantly reduce hydrofluorocarbon emissions into the atmosphere. Okay, let's say that's right. Canada, for every 100 metric tons of carbon that we stop emitting, China is putting 1,000 in. There's no net gain. Canada, the Western world, when we look at India, when we look at China, two countries of roughly 1.4 billion people each, China's economy is expanding. And so what's happening is they are bringing on constantly more and more coal-fired hydroelectric generation. And we stop 100 metric tons, we stop emitting 100 metric tons, and they put 1,000 into the atmosphere. Net gain of emissions keep going up. And the other argument I bring up is the fact that climate change is cyclical. Climate change has always happened. Go back to 950 AD, and there was a period called the medieval warming period, when Greenland became so inviting that the Vikings named it Greenland because it was a green land. The ice sheets had rolled back significantly, so to such a degree that the Vikings actually established permanent settlements in Greenland, and those settlements endured for 200 to 300 years. And then after 200 to 300 years, those settlements had to be abandoned. And the reason they had to be abandoned was because of climate change. So the climate changed and the northern hemisphere warmed up incredibly. Permanent settlements established in Greenland. And then 4.5 centuries later, 450, 500 years later, we went into another period of climate change called the Little Ice Age, where there were cataclysmic weather events across the northern hemisphere recorded in history, hailstones that killed people and animals and cattle, anything or anyone who wasn't sheltered. I've got Anna Monarchy has come back saying, hey, everyone, populism should prevail, but they are all WEF slaves. That's the biggest challenge in this, is you have an individual like Poilievre saying that he will pull Canada out of the World Economic Forum, but politicians lie all the time. Right now, as things stand, when an election comes, whenever it comes, I will be voting for the conservative candidate in my riding. I can't vote for Poilievre. He's in Ottawa Carleton. I don't live there. People say, I'll never vote for Poilievre. Well, guess what? Unless you live in Ottawa Carleton, you can't anyway. I'll be voting for Philip Lawrence. He's the conservative candidate in this riding. He's our sitting MP. Anna Monarchy goes on, give the government more money and the weather will be gooder. Yeah, that's that famous Ralph Wiggum meme that gets shared around. Kevin C., we have one common goal to share Christ, the Savior, to the lost. That was the big part of my video yesterday. And I think if you want to find the cloud and the silver lining to everything that's going on, all the bad things that are happening in this world, the COVID agenda, the climate change agenda, everything. Times like this, people have asked, not non-Christians often will say, well, where is God? Why isn't God stopping this? God is using this as a wake-up call and come home. Come home. Come back to me. Come back to the author of all things. Come back to the creator of all things. But don't listen to me. Don't listen to Kevin C. Don't listen, get into relationship within this book. This is a standard revised version. There are a million, or there's got to be at least 100 different translations. I have a bias towards the King James, although my King James Bible is up there. It was my grandmother's, and it's not in the greatest shape, so I don't use it that much. I need to get a new King James version and catch up on what's being written. Betty Zoom says, hello from Niagara. I've never mentioned this, but I was born in Welland, so I know the area well. I was born in, some people ask this, so I'll give a little autobiographical. I was born in Port Colborne, Ontario, which is in Welland out by Niagara Falls. We actually lived in a town called Ridgeway, but I don't remember any of it because at 6 months old, we moved to New York City. My dad worked in the finance, he worked for a Canadian bank that had their international operations were based in New York. And so we lived in Staten Island, New York for 3 or so years. Later, we made our way to New Jersey. My dad started making enough money to get us out of Staten Island because Staten Island is a dump. So horrible. And we moved to a very nice part of northern New Jersey called Bergen County. Then I spent a year and a half. I was there until I was 9. We spent a year and a half living in Burlington, spent a year living in Portland, Oregon on the West Coast. Then from the age of 12 on, basically, I grew up on the eastern end in the suburbs of Toronto, a town called Pickering. But I've also lived in Quebec City, now in my little town, Northumberland County, Ontario, little town of Brighton. So that's just a little biography of all the different places I've lived. And I was thinking about that in terms of climate. I don't have the benchmarks that other people have. I live now, if I drive down to New Jersey, and I did go down a few years ago, it's a 7-8 hour drive. I think it's 400 or 500 miles south of me. So the climate's going to be different where I live now versus where I was growing up when I was a kid. And people say now, they say, well, this is not normal. It's never been like this in my life. Today's March 13th. And today here, the temperature was in and around 15 degrees Celsius. I guess that would probably be high 50s in and around 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Incredibly warm for this time of year, admittedly. But these cycles of warming and cooling last 300, 400, even 500 years. And this period that we're in, I mentioned we had the medieval warming period from around 950 AD to about 1400. Then from 1400 till roughly 1800, we had the Little Ice Age. And from 1800 going forward, we've now been in a warming trend. And we're only a couple hundred years into it. And if this warming trend is going to last 300, 400, 500 years, we could have a lot more to come. I got to catch up. Antimonarchy is about an hour north of Toronto along the 401. Antimonarchy says campfires must have caused the Ice Age. When I was a kid, 1976 or so, 75, 76 is when we lived in Burlington. And I remember March break, we were flying south for March break, and there was an absolute blizzard that hit. And I wanted to move back to New Jersey because it was unreal. Betty Zoom says, hi, neighbor. PP, I assume, is Pierre Polyev. Wiebenhout said, all that is hidden is being revealed. I think that's in reference to what I was saying about how God is calling us home. Yeah, the ground is shaking under your feet, so you better seek refuge in the creator of all things. The ark, Noah's ark. The ark is Jesus Christ. Monarchy says, I'm not religious, but the times seem like the chapters of Revelation. I mean, we all went through that with when the COVID passports came in, when the vaccine passports came in. There's that passage in Revelation. I forget what chapter and verse. I'm bad at that. And I'm not going to go onto Google and search it out. But it's the passage about the mark of the beast and how everyone who wanted to participate, everyone who wants to participate in the economy, everyone who wants to buy and sell will be required to take the mark of the beast. I do think I have it highlighted in this version. But I don't, I think it was around 12 or 13. Kevin C, I think may know, but I won't dig too deep to find it. I mean, basically, we all went through that period where because I wouldn't take this injection, I couldn't sit down in Tim Hortons and have a simple cup of coffee because I wouldn't take the mark. That was one way I was looking at it. And I think a lot of people are waking up to that. And I think Christians, we can be our own worst enemies. We serve as a barrier to bringing people to faith because we're so judgmental, so self-righteous, so condescending. I think Christians, we can be a barrier to people getting into relationship with Christ when we should be reaching out our hand. Catching up. Wiebenhout says the only sure thing about climate is that it will change. Amen. Climate changes. Betty Zoom, small world. Her, I wasn't born, raised here, but Betty comes from Saskatchewan. My dad's stepdad, my step grandfather, was from Saskatchewan. Wiebenhout, LOL. And yes, the mountains here are beautiful. Lived in Vancouver. Wiebenhout says certain folks think they can force the issue. Betty Zoom is saying we will not comply. That, when you look at the COVID era, look at what happened to people who wouldn't put a mask on. You would have the police called on you for not putting on a mask. What's going to happen going forward? Are they going to ban my backyard barbecue and say that, and the manner I think you better be ready, because the manner in which people reacted to the COVID crap, and if you didn't follow the stickers on the floor and walked the wrong way down a grocery aisle, there would be that Mensa dropout with their double-digit IQ having an aneurysm and having the police called on. Well, if you put on your backyard barbecue, talked about it for a long time. It's kind of fallen out of the discourse, but this whole concept of 15-minute cities that they want to bring in, restricting everyone to little localized areas, and you'll only be allowed to leave your district, your 15-minute segment, X number of times, a certain number of times each month or each year. Um, Anna Monarchy is talking about the Neuralink, which is this brain implant. Neuralink, I believe, is a company that's funded by Elon Musk. And um, I haven't read too much on it. Apparently, it's gone into human trials now. You have Yuval Noah Harari, who is the #2 guy at the World Economic Forum. I think he's Klaus Schwab's top advisor. He's this Israeli atheist, and he talks openly about surveillance under the skin. We have now reached the point in human history where we can have surveillance under the skin and know people's body temperatures and this and that. If you go, you can go to Horizons Canada. It's actually a division of the Canadian government. And you can go onto their page and read about biodigital convergence, this idea of merging the biological world, meaning humanity, with the digital world. And they paint this little dystopian future where you upload your dream data to the cloud, and then later you can check your dream data. And if you can check it, others can check it. And it's this Orwellian. When you go to Horizons Canada's page, it has a great representation of the so-called all-seeing eye. I would invite anyone to check it out. It is freaky. And this is what I like about doing these videos, is it helps remind me of everything I've come across over the past 4 or 5 years. Betty Zoom says, it's in space, I think, like internet. Neuralink, no. Neuralink is, I'm fairly certain it is a digital implant. He also has SpaceX, which is, also provide, and he's also providing, I forget the name of the company that he's using to provide satellite connectivity to the internet, but that's something else. Anna Monarchy said, I had a guy getting right near my face for being a couple feet too close to him. He didn't see the irony. It's crazy. It's crazy, everything that's gone on. And right now, I think we're kind of in a lull. We went through insanity of the COVID era, and then things have calmed down now. We still see, the mass marauders out there. But my guess is it's 10% of the population, maybe. At least that's my observation in my area. Betty Zoom says it's terrible out there, at your own risk now. Yeah. Vivan Hot says, eat the bugs. There is a company out in London, Ontario. It's called Aspire, Aspire. And I think it's 2 years ago, they opened the largest cricket protein processing plant in the world. And a CBC ran a news article on it. And they were quoting a professor from the University of Guelph, which is a big agricultural school in Canada. And this professor was talking about the urgent need for the world to transition off a meat-based diet for proteins and to transition to alternative sources like crickets, and how this was urgently needed because the population of cattle on the planet is far too many, and they emit methane, and methane contributes to climate change. Farting cows, basically, flatulent cows. And so in the wake of that article, a lot of people started talking about saying, look, they want us to start eating bugs. And then a month or so later, CBC ran an article calling anyone who says they want to transition us onto eating bugs, that there's this new conspiracy theory out there that's for the tinfoil hat types. And it's like, I wanted to say to the CBC, wait a minute, your own article reported on this, talking about it as an urgent need to transition people away from meat-based protein to things like crickets. And now you're calling your own reporting a conspiracy theory. catching up. Social distancing, social distancing. The guy was repeating as I kept backing up, talking, and Monarchy is talking about his experience with someone you're supposed to stay 2 feet away from me, getting right up in your face, which, yeah, it was absolutely insane. But emotion, this is the thing. It's an emotional people don't think rationally. So they don't even see the contradiction in their own behavior. They just know they're afraid. And it's hard for me to be angry at someone who has been manipulated into irrational fear. I blame more the manipulator than the person who's basically the Pavlovian dog. I'm just trying to catch up. Betty Zoom, some in Ontario also, but no vitamins. They won't keep. Yeah, there's talk in this country that they're going to eliminate a lot of natural-based supplements. I mean, I take no drugs. Well, coffee is a drug, caffeine, and I do smoke, which I should not, but nicotine is a drug. Although I found out something interesting that some may find eye-opening. Nicotine exists in tomatoes. Look it up. In eggplant, in green peppers and peppers, not just green peppers, but all peppers have nicotine in them. And early in the COVID era, something got reported on the smoker's paradox. And I wanted to talk about this a while ago during a video I did about unmasking the COVID era, and I mentioned the smoker's paradox, but but then I just left it there and I never got back to it. The smoker's paradox, early in the pandemic, it was reported that in cities like London and Paris and New York City, they were finding that the number of smokers coming in and getting seriously sick with this flu-like respiratory virus was basically nil. And you would think that if 25% of a population are smokers, that smokers would have been overrepresented. But instead, smokers were underrepresented, which suggested that perhaps nicotine or other components of cigarettes might have some prophylactic or protective benefit to help someone not get sick from a respiratory illness. And I kept waiting to see a follow-up and studies done on it, and nothing was ever done. And I think that was on purpose, because if anything had come out and was found to be an effective treatment or efficacious way of dealing with COVID, then they couldn't have forced the vaccines on people. So they had to trash anything that came out. Ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, nicotine, maybe it had some positive benefits. And that's something to look into. There's a video I saw on Rumble a while ago talking about it. And it was eye-opening, and it reminded me, yeah, whatever happened to that smoker's paradox? Veben had said masks are the greatest thing that ever happened to introverts. Amen. I mean, I make a point. I work in a retail environment now. I left the Army in June of 2021. I wasn't going to take that job. And in May of 2022, I started working at a local retail establishment. So I deal with the public daily. And I am an outgoing, I am an extrovert on steroids. And I talk to everyone. And if I see someone in a mask, I tend to make a point of greeting them and saying hi and how are you and what a great day today, because I look at a person in that situation and I see them as being afraid. And I've actually had a couple times where the conversation went nicely, and where I was able to bring up the mask, and I actually had one person take it off. Because I said the biggest issue I have with masking, I used to wear, I was trained in how to use them when I was with an ambulance unit at Valcartier. I said, my biggest problem is cross-contamination. You've got this mask on your face, you're breathing on it, it's wet, it's warm, and people touch them all the time, then they touch everything. And that's just germ spreading. And I would prefer everyone just take it off, but I know that some people, and she goes, oh my God, I never thought of that. I said, you know, I said, you can look it up. Go to the World Health Organization. It's on their own website. Every time you touch the mask, every time, for any reason, you're supposed to clean, wash, sanitize your hands, but no one does that. So all they do is they touch the thing and then they touch common surfaces, and that's cross-contamination, and that contributes to viral spread. And she took her mask off and put it away. But we were able to start off with a nice conversation first. It wasn't confrontational. It was just two people talking. Jason King says people with perceived power suck. Monarchy says nicotine and caffeine increase your, and I can't pronounce that, acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is a learning and memory neurotransmitter. All right. And Mike Christie heard that as well, that nicotine protects you from COVID-19. There's a video on it. Maybe I'll have to search it out. It was shared to me by one of my friends on Facebook. And I watched the video, and it was enlightening. And he actually cited some research done by Harvard that shows that nicotine in of itself, it's not nicotine that is addictive. It's all the other crap that they put into cigarettes that make them addictive. If we think about Native North Americans, peace pipe, they were smoking tobacco. Betty Zoom, I think I read something like it protected you because of something else in the cigarette. I think it was the nicotine. I think in fact, I mean, my medical degree comes from Facebook and the internet, so what do I know? But I think, you know, we all heard about this spike protein and how it attached to receptors in the cells and everything. This idea was that nicotine somehow prevented that spike protein from accessing or connecting with these receptors. Like I say, my medical degree is from the internet. And Monarchy believes or says that weed is also protective in ways. Eben Hod says, thanks, Gordon, and God bless, folks. God bless you as well. I should wrap up. I have now gone over an hour, which is kind of my high water mark. I don't like to go over an hour, but I'm already there. Betty Zoom says, you're right. So many people in fear of getting sick. Unfortunately, and this is, I'm going to bring it back to faith again. If you think that this life is it, that this life is over, you know, you live, you die, and then you go into the ground and you're meat for the worms, well, then to a degree, there's a rational explanation for being terminally, you know, being so afraid of death. But when you wake up and realize that you have a spirit, you have a soul, this life is not the end. But that's difficult. And I know it's difficult to make that leap of faith. I'm just going to read up the last few comments. Yeah, hospitals made nurses wear them all day. Oh, I don't know if I have. Oh, yeah, I do. When I absolutely had to wear a mask, this is the mask I wore. It's a thin little piece of plastic, and they called it either, one version was called the Mingle mask. It has a little, I don't know if I can show it. It's got this little plastic thing, kind of a chin rest. So it can sit on the chin. And then, like a regular mask, straps over the ears. And now it just came out. And this was the mask I wore. And I guess it was 7-8 months ago. Had to go to the blood clinic, go see the vampires at for blood work being done for a family member. And they still required the mask. So I dragged this out. I mean, it's dirty as anything now. And I wore it. So there, my nose and mouth are covered by this thin piece of plastic, and you can't really see it. And one of the workers at this clinic went, "Sir, you have to wear a mask." And I just went, and the girl beside him said he is wearing one of those plastic things. Like, I consider this passive aggressive compliance. Catching up again. And Jason is asking people to hit the like button. I've had 10 already. Thank you, everyone. I've gone over 700 subscribers. A couple months ago, I wasn't even at 200. Things have gone crazy. I really appreciate it. I do think I have something worthwhile to contribute to the public discourse. But in order to be part of the public discourse, I mean, exposure is hard. People talk about the YouTube game and how difficult it is. It is what it is. But when I get subscriptions, when I get likes, when I get comments, from what I understand, and I'm not the most technologically up-to-date person, but my understanding is that somehow defeats these algorithms that can suppress content, and then my videos have a better chance of being seen. And if 100 people see it, maybe 4 or 5 will say, this guy's got something to say, and they'll join in, and then things can grow. I will admit, having a bit of an ego, I would love the chance to talk to a guy like Joe Rogan, or to a guy like Michael Yeadon, or Jordan Peterson, or Ben Shapiro, or an individual like that. Could it ever happen? I'll never say it's impossible. I know that the chances are slim, but who knows? Talk to you later, buddy. You as well, Animonarchy. Thanks, bud. I want to make sure I keep thinking Animonarchy. I used to think it was a female, and Animonarchy is a guy. Blackface, son of Castro, good night from Nova Scotia. A blue noser, good night. Betty Zoom, have a good night. All hugs. Betty Zoom, better than what they had to wear. The cloth those cloth masks are disgusting. Monarchy compromised in one hospital with a face shield like that. Yeah, face shields. Mike Christie likes my mask. Saw someone else with a mask like that. Perfect. Like I say, passive aggressive compliance. You want me to wear something useless? I'll wear something so blatantly useless that anyone can see it. But it ticked off the boxes. And Monarchy, I plan on calling into InfoWar again. Have a handful of times plugging this channel. Hey, like I say, who knows what could happen? I'm sure it can happen. We'll see if something comes out of it. Good night, all. God bless. And I will say it again. And I know it's not popular. I say this to people I work with, or people, customers that I say. If someone says something I really like, I'll say words very close or exactly this. I'll say, I know it's not a popular sentiment to express right now in today's culture, but God bless you. And God love you. And you never know. Plant seeds. Anyway. Oh, average white guy, it's pronounced Mick Christie. She's my girl. Awesome. Mick Christie. God bless all. We'll talk to you again. The next long one will be Sunday. Between Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I'll probably put out 1, 2, or maybe 3, but they'll be shorter, and probably just I got some faith-based jokes I want to share, because that seems to help my exposure. So jokes seem to help. And I have a really good Trudeau joke as well. I'll do one video with another good Trudeau joke. Not original. I don't come up with these. I just repeat them. Anyway, blessings all. Good night. God bless.